In Hollywood's current age of nostalgia, where franchises rule, both new and resurrected, can Warner Brothers build a new vertical with Game of Thrones? Warner Brothers has a lot of makings of great franchises. Right now, they mostly have DC and Wizarding World. We're going to talk about a little bit more about Wizarding World in a moment. But everything else is so far right now a potential franchise. Like, can we do more with The Matrix? Stuff like that. They had Lord of the Rings, but that show, it's going to streaming, but over on Amazon. Nerds! So, can the upcoming plans for live-action prequels to Game of Thrones and maybe an animated series, again, don't worry, we're going to go over all of it, possibly lead to merchandise? And, well, they had merchandise at one point, but I think theme parks too? That would be incredible. We were recently discussing, Wall Street very much wants NBC Universal. They feel Comcast shouldn't be in the entertainment business. So they want, but AT&T can. But anyway, Wall Street wants Warner Brothers and NBC Universal to merge. And that would, give Warner Brothers the theme parks. Universal already leasing Harry Potter for Wizarding World. And some of you were like, what about a Game of Thrones section? And I was like, I like that. I like it a lot. So I see real potential there. But Wizarding World for adults. But speaking of Harry Potter, what's holding back both of these franchises is that Warner Brothers is stuck having to do major damage control. For DC too, to be fair. And as of right now, it's not clear if either of these two franchises can be saved. I think DC will be, I don't know. Boy, what's going on over there, man? All right, so anyway, today though, I'm going to focus on Game of Thrones. What happened? What's planned? And what needs to happen going forward for these new plans to work? And as always, I invite you to share your own thoughts down below. I know you have a lot of them when it comes to Game of Thrones. Now, launching in 2011, Game of Thrones quickly became a huge hit and cultural sensation. The kind of TV hit where millions of people tune in every night each week. That's very rare these days. It's always been rare, but it's even rarer today. And Game of Thrones was even bigger than any of the hit shows that had come before it, amplified by a global audience. Everybody tuned in the same day, globally, worldwide. That's incredible. And then also social media. Social media really came into its own during, Game of Thrones' run. And a movie-level budget each episode before it became fashionable. Game of Thrones was both the most pirated show from 2012 to 2019. Now The Mandalorian wears that crown. And on the other side of the spectrum, also the most critically lauded. It has the most Emmy nominations of all time for a drama series, and 12 wins overall, and 4 of those for Best Drama. And David Benioff and D.B. Weiss threw that all away. Wow, the creators and showrunners, they did both, were eager to get on with the next stage of their careers. They'd never had any real success beforehand, which should have been a giant red flag. And they had a whole Star Wars trilogy beckoning them, so they wanted to get onto it. Plus, George R.R. Martin, distracted by all the publicity for the very popular show, suddenly he was a very coveted guest. And not being a very fast writer to begin with, he had fallen horribly behind with the novels. So Benioff and Weiss had no more source material to draw from, which means they had to make up the ending of Game of Thrones themselves. And let's go back to the lack of any real career beforehand. These guys aren't good at coming up with the story, which is weird because they're writers. So they're much better adapters than they are telling original stories. They should have realized their own weakness and maybe outsourced it. What a disaster. All right, so the result was an 8th season, which started out with coffee cups and water bottles popping up like weeds in various shots. And I mean, I know, people have pointed out that, that happens sometimes, but this was just, it had never happened on the show before, and it was not even noticed even in editing the show in post, because you can digitally remove that stuff as they did once audiences spotted it. So it just showed a whole show that was a whole team that was fast to wrap things up. And then it ended, as no one can forget, with viewers watching in horror as fan favorite Daenerys burned King's Landing to the ground on screen, much like how Benioff and Weiss were burning the entire franchise to the ground in their own mad power grab. That was brutal. Ironically, the blowback was so bad that Benioff and Weiss decided to drop out of Star Wars. The whole reason they'd rushed the 8th season in the first place, because they didn't want to face another aggressive fandom that was, quite frankly, ready and waiting for them. They even had to cancel their Comic-Con appearances, you might recall. We were like, no way they're going to show up. And of course, they did not. And while Benioff and Weiss are still somewhat involved in Game of Thrones, none of the Game of Thrones spin-offs that they're involved with have currently gotten the green light to move forward at Warner Brothers. Instead, Warner Brothers is trying to put the franchise in the hands of new talent in the hopes of reviving it, to bolster HBO and HBO's own spin-off, interestingly enough, HBO Max. You know, it really would benefit them to have a single driving creative force who really understands George R.R. Martin's work. You know, and it's hard to find an executive like Kevin Feige who has a good business mind and understands the source material. So maybe this should be divided up. Although that's what Warner Brothers tried to do with DC with John Berg and Jeff Johns, and that was also a disaster. It's very hard to find the right person, which is why Marvel is just so unique in so many ways, and that's one of them. So Benioff and Weiss are definitely not the ones who should stick around. But when I just said it here, I didn't have it in my notes. But this proliferation of putting Game of Thrones in the hands of different talent reminds me a little bit of Warner Brothers' game plan with DC, which has, as we've just been discussing, some incredible highs, but an awful lot of lows that are hard to get over. So not having a single driving creative force could be problematic. And why have they not learned this lesson from DC? All right, so anyway, House of the Dragon set for 2022. It was exciting when they announced that, during the big HBO Max launch presentation, they had the exciting poster. Everybody can't wait. And it's actually reached the casting stage. Because remember, there was another prequel that they were doing, and they scrapped that after some development and even some casting there. Poor Naomi Watts. But anyway, Patty Considine stars, joined by Olivia Cooke, Emma D'Arcy, and Matt Smith. Matt Smith is a real casting coup, not only coming off of Doctor Who, but most recently 2 seasons of The Crown, where he was amazing. That whole show, The Crown's great. All right, so anyway, this live-action series will tell the history of the House of Targaryen set 300 years before Game of Thrones, which means tons of dragons. It is called House of the Dragon. We love ourselves some dragons. I think that's one of the reasons the other show didn't move forward. We want to see dragons. And you remember the glory of her family that Dany was constantly trying to recapture, the whole bend the knee thing? Well, you're going to see that glory here. HBO is also considering adapting the tales of Dunk and Egg, which follows the adventures of Dunk, the future Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and Egg, aka the future King Aegon Targaryen, the first Targaryen king. There's a lot of Aegons. It's going to be hard to keep track of all these characters. And also when you go, I don't think there is a fandom for these books, but it's not like the fandom for the comics where everybody can get excited about certain characters. These are all, I think for the most part, totally new characters to the vast majority of the people who would be into this content. I'm sure some of you will be like, no, it's not, Grace. I know these characters intimately. Well, that's great, but I think that you're a small fraction of the audience. But anyway, an important one, but a small one nonetheless. I imagine HBO feels that this kind of a show would remind viewers of the adventures of Arya and the Hound. I think that's fair. And also all the medieval stories of knights and their squires. Also Arthur and Merlin with the sword and the stone. I think that's a pretty good bet. I can see that. I mean, I think casting and the creative team behind it, as always, would be key. I don't know, though, comic book properties have very different feels to them, but I think that I don't know how different these Game of Thrones stories could feel it's the same thing I'm worried about with Star Wars proliferation. How will these shows feel different enough? It'll be interesting to see as they try to feed our hunger. We're stuffed, but keep going. All right, so anyway, and then it was just announced that Warner Brothers is accepting pitches from writers for an animated spin-off for HBO Max, because these other shows are on HBO, because that's what Game of Thrones was, but they're like, we need to protect HBO Max. What can we have exclusive for HBO Max? And they're like, how about a Game of Thrones animated series? They're not definitely going to do it. They have to see if one of these pitches sparks their interest. Animation for adults has been very hot lately. Netflix has led the charge, as they always do these days, and they're not letting up anytime soon. Castlevania, Blood of Zeus, such a good show. And the upcoming animated series for Cyberpunk and the just announced Kong Skull Island and Tomb Raider from Legendary. Those are big deals. HBO Max itself already has the fan favorite Harley Quinn, with season 3 coming soon. Animation is cheaper to produce than live action, yet still can have all the action and VFX fans want in these stories. It's not dirt cheap, but it's cheaper than live action. Also, they're global pandemic proof to a point, as writers, voice actors, and animators can all work remotely. So this is another reason that Hollywood is suddenly so into adult animation. Disney Plus even has Marvel's What If series coming this year. Now, so far, again, there's no one executive in charge of Game of Thrones at Warner Brothers. Like Walter Hamada controls DC, and they just promoted Tom Aschim, difficult name to pronounce, to handle the Wizarding World brand. He's from the kids division, which makes me a little nervous. I'm like, it's not a kiddie brand. You have to realize that your core fan base has aged up, and you have to follow we know what Airbender so successfully did by aging up the characters. Although then Airbender also imploded for creative. It's hard to do this franchise stuff, which is again, why Marvel has just really been shining. Although we'll see how Phase 4 goes. Kevin Feige is trying to pull off some difficult tricks that no one else has been able to survive. But if these Game of Thrones projects work out, you can expect Warner Brothers to create a similar Game of Thrones division and hire an executive to head it up. However, can Game of Thrones move forward or backward if they're doing all these prequels if the current wounds never heal? The way fan favorite storylines were resolved, Daenerys and Jon Snow, the Cersei, Jaime, and Brienne love triangle. Remember, everybody was like, no way that's going to happen. And then it happened. I mean, it will be hard to forgive those. To me, the only way that Game of Thrones can continue is for fans to fully trust the franchise again. And that won't happen unless those endings are corrected. Because otherwise, I think fans will always be second-guessing every move that they make over at Game of Thrones, just like they do with Star Wars and DC. You know, right now, it's like whatever Marvel does, it's like, okay, we can trust them. And, you know, that's very valuable. This is a world of magic and fantasy. You're telling me Daenerys can't be resurrected after a freaking dragon clutched her in his claw and flew off into the night? That dragon's got to know something. I mean, it was smart enough to know Jon Snow's true lineage, or at least one of them did, and it knew enough to burn down the Iron Throne in a fit of rage, which was ridiculous. But if the dragon's that smart, let's use it. And the Stark children were scattered to the wind, like so many spin-offs. That had to be somewhat intentional on the part of Warner Brothers, right? You would think they were like, we could follow any one of these kids. Let's see if we can get their deals to work and who might be interested. Now, speaking of who might be interested and available, I think that Kit Harington and Richard Madden might be lost to the Eternals. Let's see how that movie turns out. Darn it! Gwendolyn Christie just got Netflix's The Sandman, along with Charles Dance. That guy's everywhere. And Christopher sorry, I'm trying to pronounce his name correctly. Hivu just joined The Witcher. I'm not sure how big his role is, but that's a pretty nice gig. But Sophie Turner and Maisie Williams, I suspect their X-Men days are over, even though I thought that both did a very nice job with what they were given. But a lot of the cast remain simply working actors, totally available to come back. But you know who's super available, and this is the saddest of all? Emilia Clarke. I think that the way her character was handled, coupled with some big box office bombs, she just has not been able to recover. So while right after Game of Thrones ended, she was probably like, I'm done, I think enough time has passed without any, forward momentum for her career emerging, that I think there's a check big enough out there and a series idea compelling enough that she could be convinced to come back. And to me, since I felt the way her character was handled was the most egregious, that would be the thing that would be most exciting to me. I would really like to see Emilia Clarke return and continue the story of Daenerys. Let's go forward. I mean, she was so cool with those dragon wings behind her. I mean, she was on the cusp of greatness, and it was snatched away for no compelling and no reason that made sense. So that's how I feel about it. And I'm curious, what do you think must be made amends for you to feel good about Game of Thrones again? And then what do you think about the future of the franchise? How do these shows sound to you, the live action and the animated? And then, what stories would you like to see them tell? And then also, what about potential merchandise and theme park opportunities? Do you think Game of Thrones could be a franchise as big as Marvel and DC and like Jurassic Park and stuff like that? I think it could. I think maybe it could. But it's going to be tricky, as it is for everybody, as you can see. All right, so what do you think? Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.